Imagine a banquet where perfume cones melt on your head, guests collapse from too much wine, and servants rush to feed you figs while musicians crank out love songs on harps. That's not some rowdy frat house fantasy gone ancient. It's what Egyptian upper-class parties actually looked like. And trust me, they weren't just dinners. They were spectacles, power plays, and social minefields all rolled into one long, wine-soaked night. So picture this. You've somehow scored an invitation to a feast at the mansion of a high-ranking noble, maybe a priest, a wealthy landowner, or someone connected to the royal court. You don't just stroll in whenever you like. Timing matters. Appearance matters even more. You show up in spotless linen, your wig is flawless, and you've dusted your body with oils that smell like lotus blossoms. Walking in, you're hit with a wave of incense, smoke curling up from braziers, while servants splash the ground with scented water to tamp down dust. Right away you realize this isn't just a party, it's a statement. The host is showing off their wealth, their taste, and their connections. At the door, servants hand you garlands of flowers, mostly lotus and mandrake. They drape them around your neck, place one in your hand, and then, because this is Egypt, they top your head with a little cone of perfumed wax. It looks kind of ridiculous, like you're balancing a pat of butter on your wig, but as the night goes on, it slowly melts, releasing fragrance down your hair and clothes. By the end of the evening, you either smell divine or like a floral candle that's been left in the sun too long. Either way, it's part of the vibe. Seating is next, and it's a big deal. If you're important, you're ushered to the fancy chairs up front. Those chairs aren't just furniture, they're thrones in miniature. Cushions, armrests, maybe even ivory inlays. If you're less important, congratulations, you're on a stool. And if you're a hanger-on or a distant cousin, you're probably squatting on a mat. Where you sit signals exactly where you rank in this social ecosystem. Every gesture is subtle power politics. Being placed near the host means you matter. Being pushed to the back corner means you better laugh extra loudly at every joke if you want to be invited again. Then the food arrives, and it's not subtle. This is Egypt, where the Nile floods every year and brings enough abundance to keep granaries bursting. The menu at one of these feasts makes a modern buffet look sad. We're talking roasted oxen, ducks glazed and stuffed, geese fattened to perfection, baskets piled with grapes, figs, and dates, bread in endless shapes, flat, round, even molded into little animals for decoration. Cakes sweetened with honey, nuts roasted and dusted with spices, and pitchers of thick beer foaming over. And wine. Always wine. Red, white, imported, spiced, poured into goblets so generously that you start to wonder if moderation was even a word in the Egyptian dictionary. Servants keep everything moving. They dart around the room with platters, filling bowls, pouring drinks, wiping hands, and making sure no one looks neglected. And neglect is dangerous here. If you're ignored at a feast, it's a social insult. You want to be seen drinking deeply, eating well, and laughing loudly. Otherwise, people will assume you've fallen out of favor with the host or, worse, that you're boring. But food and drink are only the beginning. What really makes the party come alive is the entertainment. In one corner, you've got a troupe of dancers, usually young women in gauzy linen, moving in rhythmic, hypnotic steps to the sound of harps, flutes, and drums. Sometimes they balance on their hands, twist acrobatically, or whirl in circles while guests clap along. Their movements are exaggerated, designed to keep everyone's attention, and there's always a flirtatious edge. Nearby, musicians sing songs, sometimes devotional, sometimes bawdy. The lyrics can be about love, lust, or straight-up drinking, depending on how much wine has been poured. And then there are the party tricks. Some hosts bring in dwarfs or foreign performers seen as exotic curiosities. Others show off pet monkeys trained to dance or pour wine. Children of servants might be dressed up and paraded around to amuse guests. Anything to keep the energy flowing and prevent boredom, because boredom at one of these gatherings is basically a death sentence for the host's reputation. Now you might think these were elegant, restrained affairs. But make no mistake, these parties could get messy. Tomb paintings don't lie. You can literally see scenes of guests being carried home, others leaning over to vomit while attendants hold their hair. Egyptian writers even left behind advice columns warning young men not to overdo it at banquets, reminding them that nobody respects the drunk who can't hold his wine. But of course, warnings exist because people ignored them. Overindulgence was part of the thrill. The line between refinement and chaos was razor thin, and crossing it could make you either legendary or a laughingstock. One of the strangest things about these parties is how much effort went into keeping guests looking and smelling fresh while they descended into chaos. Servants would reapply oils to guests' skin mid-feast, offering bowls of scented water for hand-washing. They'd fan you, perfume the air with incense, and even sprinkle petals across the floor so you wouldn't notice the spilled beer or the occasional puddle of vomit in the corner. Imagine being both pampered and babysat while you party. That was the Egyptian way. And while all this food and fun was happening, so was politics. These feasts weren't just about indulgence. They were networking events centuries before LinkedIn. You toasted the right people, you laughed at the right jokes, you whispered gossip about rivals. Alliances were built over bowls of beer, marriages arranged between bites of goose, and careers destroyed by one careless drunken insult. If you wanted influence in Egypt, you didn't just pray to the gods or petition the king. You made sure you were seen at the right parties, preferably sitting in the right chair with a goblet in your hand. The decorations around you were never random. Walls of banquet halls were painted with vibrant scenes of flowers, gods, and hunting expeditions. Everything whispered wealth and power. Even the vessels you drank from were status symbols: gold, silver, faience, or glass, depending on how much the host wanted to flex. Sometimes, instead of plain pottery, your cup might be shaped like a lotus or an animal head, just to remind everyone that art and luxury went hand in hand. Of course, no party is complete without a little romance, and Egyptian feasts were no different. Those love songs sung by the musicians, they weren't always subtle. Guests flirted, slipped away for private moments in gardens, and used the excuse of sharing wine to get closer. For upper-class youth, banquets were sometimes less about diplomacy and more about testing boundaries, finding partners, or just causing scandal. There are depictions of lovers whispering in corners while dancers distract the crowd, and it doesn't take much imagination to know what followed. But if the young were sneaking off, the elders were doing something just as calculated. They were watching. Who got too drunk? Who made a fool of themselves? Who impressed the crowd with generosity or wit? Every feast became a stage, and everyone was both actor and audience. When you left at the end of the night, your reputation didn't stay behind with the spilled wine. It followed you into the temples, the courts, and the gossip circles of the city. And here's the thing. These banquets weren't just for the living. Egyptians believed in continuity between this world and the afterlife, so tomb paintings are filled with eternal feasts. For the deceased, having an eternal party depicted on their tomb wall meant they'd never run out of food, wine, or entertainment in the next life. That tells you how much these events mattered. They weren't just fleeting pleasures. They were symbols of status so powerful that you wanted them to outlive your body. Now, something people forget is that these feasts could last an entire day, sometimes stretching into the night. Imagine the endurance required. You're sitting there hour after hour, with musicians switching sets, dancers swapping routines, servants cycling in shifts to keep pouring and cleaning. Guests doze, wake up, drink more, stumble back to the table, and the whole time the host beams with pride. Hosting wasn't just expensive, it was exhausting. You needed warehouses of grain, cellars of wine, and an army of staff to pull it off. But if you managed it, your reputation skyrocketed. There was also a spiritual angle baked into the decadence. Feasting was tied to honoring the gods and ancestors. By overloading guests with food and drink, the host symbolically showed their piety. Look how much abundance I can channel from the gods and redistribute. In a society obsessed with balance and reciprocity, this mattered. So while you're on your third goblet of wine, remember that technically, you're also part of a cosmic ritual reinforcing order in the universe. Not a bad excuse for overindulging, right? As the night wound down, the atmosphere shifted. Some guests stumbled out, carried by servants or leaning on friends. Others stayed until the last song ended, savoring the prestige of being part of the innermost circle. The servants cleaned up the remains: bones, breadcrumbs, spilled wine, half-melted perfume cones stuck to wigs. and prepared for the next feast. For the host, the measure of success wasn't how much food was left, but how many stories people told the next morning. If your banquet was the talk of the town, you'd achieved immortality long before death. And that's the real magic of Egyptian parties. They weren't just about indulgence, they were about weaving yourself into the social fabric, stamping your legacy on the minds of peers, and reminding everyone that in a land where the gods watched every move, you knew how to live like one. So next time you sip wine at dinner, raise a toast to the ancient Egyptians. They threw parties so extravagant, so wild, and so layered with meaning that thousands of years later, we're still talking about them. And if this little trip back in time gave you a taste of how wild history can be, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the strange, surprising, and downright human side of the past.